Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me for this video. In this painting demonstration, I will be showing you how I created this ocean wave oil painting. Before we begin, I just want to throw in a couple disclaimers. First of all, this demonstration is just what works for me. This is not the only way to approach painting, and I'm not telling you that this is how you have to do it. This is just how I created one of my paintings, and it's only one approach, and there are many ways to approach oil painting. Second disclaimer, some of the colors I'm using are kind of specialty colors that are usually not found in basic oil painting kits. Normally I work with a lot of primaries and basic colors and do a ton of color mixing. This time I just picked out the colors that were closest to my reference. However, you will still see me mix every single color. I hardly ever paint straight out of the tube. I always mix my colors. And lastly, this is the sped up, quick, summarized version. However, I do have the real-time version, which is over 7 hours long in real time, with me narrating every step of the way. A whole 7 hours worth of it on my Patreon page, which you can have access to for the cost of a Starbucks latte. So if you are interested in that, the link will be in the description. Thank you for your patience with this long introduction. Let's begin. The first step is to edit my reference image. I almost always use my own photography, however, this time I used a photo from a website called pexels.com. They have images available royalty-free, which means you are allowed to use them. I am not sponsored. This is just a resource that's available to you, and I use it sometimes. Don't just steal photography off the internet, because if you want to sell your painting, the photographer can legally come after you and sue you, and you will lose the case because they own the rights to that image. Always make sure you're using either your own photography references or you have permission from the photographer you want to use. In this case, this image is available royalty-free on pexels.com. It's a great resource. They have so many beautiful images. I will link that in the description so you can use it for yourself. I have a 6x6 inch piece of canvas paper that I already toned with a diluted layer of burnt sienna. I don't like to work on blank white surfaces anymore, so I usually tone the surface with a neutral color, and now I'm measuring and drawing on the grid on my surface. I plan on making a separate video all about grids and how to use them, and it is also demonstrated in the real-time version on Patreon as well. I've seen artists come out of some prestigious art academies using grids, and it's absolutely a great method that you can use. I don't always use them, but I do like them, and honestly, whatever method is most enjoyable for you, do it. Once the grid is done, I start painting all the basic shapes in this painting with some more burnt sienna. All I'm really doing is adding a little bit of Gamsol, which is the solvent I'm using, to my burnt sienna, and then painting on all the basic shapes. This is the underpainting, the pre-sketch, and sort of the skeleton of the painting that I'm going to build upon. I have a video all about underpaintings and why I use them, so please go watch that if you don't know what an underpainting is. I do my best to explain that really simply. Link will be in the description. Once I'm done with the underpainting, I let it dry for a little bit, wipe off my palette, and then start laying down my colors. For this painting, the colors I will be using are ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, cobalt teal, radiant turquoise, radiant blue, radiant green, titanium white, which was on its last breath clearly, burnt sienna already on my palette, and next to it I put Mars black and some Galkid gel for the medium. I will also add more colors as I paint, which you will see me do. I started off by mixing together some ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and cobalt teal. Then I placed some phthalo green on my palette because I decided I'm definitely going to need that color too. And this color I'm mixing is basically for the topmost shadowy part of this painting where the water is deeper away from the sand, so it appears like a darker blue. And then I also added little bits of titanium white for the smaller ripples in the water with light reflections off of them. And I'm basically just making my way down. So I started off with the top of the painting and I'll gradually work my way down. You'll see me dip my brush into my medium there, my little glob of Galkid gel, and this medium decreases the drying time. I also would gradually dip my brush into my odorless mineral spirits, my Gamsol, which is a solvent. There's another medium I have called Galkid that's more liquidy, so I often mix a 50-50 mixture of those, but I didn't really feel like using that today, so I just used Galkid gel and then would occasionally dip my brush into the Gamsol and combine that with the medium on the palette. I'm just being really intuitive about it. The key though is not to use too much medium on your brush because that will kind of make the paint way too transparent and sometimes really unworkable. So it's good to just figure out your balance, and honestly you eventually figure that out with lots of practice, so don't really worry about doing things right or the best way right off the bat. Like, just know that it's okay to make mistakes in your art, and these are the experiences that will teach you how to be better. So then I brought in a little bit of Mars Black to that darker blue mixture I made with the phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. This was to desaturate it a little bit and darken it. I normally don't use any kind of black paint for this. I'll typically just use a combination of different colors, but in this specific painting it actually worked quite well. And also, this is the very first color layer, so I will actually be painting a second color layer over it, not super thick, but rather more of a detail layer where I work on things and perfect things a bit more. But this is just to get all the basic color shapes down and then build on the details after that. So here I finally brought in a little bit of phthalo green to that color and then added a little tiny bit of Galkyd gel, and of course gradually just dipping my brush into that Gamsol in small amounts. I don't want to water down my paint too much, just a little bit, just to make it a bit more manageable and apply more smoothly onto the surface. And then using that same brush without cleaning it off, I brought in a little bit of titanium white just to lighten that color up again, to continue painting some of the light that's being reflected behind that darker wave, because the light source was coming a bit from the back, so that little bit of water there created this darker shadow, and then it's back to the light because it wasn't blocking the light in that section. It's so hard for me to explain water, but I'm hoping I'm making somewhat sense. And now I'm adding a little bit of radiant turquoise to that as well, so it won't desaturate it at all. Then I brought in some more cobalt teal and phthalo green, and this is just for some more of the lighter parts of the sky reflecting off of the waves. So this is just a very gradual building process. I go back and forth between my colors and my brushes and just whatever feels comfortable. It's super intuitive, and my attention switches around on the painting as I work through it. And now back to my liner brush, my detail brush. I'm just working on some of the tiny ripples and details on the wave with the light blue color I created, and I also brought in a little bit of radiant green into that color as well, and radiant green is that color on the far right corner at the top there. And now I'm going back to the darker blues, and I'm just laying down some of those colors to emphasize some more waves and darker shadows within the water, where the light isn't quite hitting those areas as much as the lighter parts. Once again, I'm really terrible at explaining this, so I'm sorry if this is all confusing and sounds weird, but I'm hoping I'm making some sense. This is why there's a reference to use as a guide, because sometimes words don't really explain as efficiently as what your eyes can see. So I love using references, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to paint realistically and have really detailed art and get better at that, then you should absolutely be practicing with references. And please don't expect to have the most incredible results in your art right away. Even if you are following a painting tutorial, maybe you get a different result. It just takes so much practice to get better. It's just like anything else. You just need lots of practice. So don't be discouraged if you don't get the results you want right away, if your art isn't perfect in your eyes or doesn't match your standard of what you'd like to create. Just stick with it and paint as much as you can. You have to paint a lot, like a lot. Paint tons and tons of paintings, as much as you can, as often as you can, different subjects. Don't just cut yourself short just because you made a few paintings that you don't like. That doesn't mean you should give up. Just keep practicing. So now for that big, beautiful center wave, I'm taking titanium white and just kind of creating a separate section for it on my palette. And then I'm picking up some of the little bits of blues that are already mixed in with that and a tiny bit of Mars Black, just the smallest amount. I don't want to create a dark color. I would still like to keep it light, but it is like this grayish blue color of some of that sea foam looking stuff at the crest of the wave, that highest point where the water's collapsing. Those bubbles that are made. And so now I'm just kind of trying to apply it in the natural way that it occurs in the wave, which it has some crazy shapes in it. It's not just like one perfect smooth geometric shape. The ocean is chaotic, and there's points of the wave where the water kind of sticks out and splashes up a little bit. So I'm just trying to recreate that natural randomness of the ocean. And this is really just the starting point for this center wave. I will be going back and forth between these turquoise colors and greens and blues and then back to the white paint. And also here you can really tell why I love underpaintings, because the canvas is toned, and when you place white paint down you can actually see it. So it's really great for that. The light color I'm using here would not look the same if I was working with a blank white canvas. Now I'm taking some radiant green, some radiant turquoise, and a little bit of titanium white. And this color right here is for some of the parts of the wave that are a little bit transparent. So there are parts where the sunshine is kind of peeking through that wave, illuminating it from behind the wave, and it creates this beautiful turquoise color. And I'm just placing that color down in those areas where I'm seeing it in my reference. Then I go back to the light color, the lightest color I've created so far, for some more of those foamy splash bits. Again, like I said, I just go back and forth between my colors, and really whatever I feel like doing, that's where I put the paint. There's not so much of a strict, rigid process that I follow. So now I'm taking some radiant turquoise and some radiant blue, and towards the left side of the wave, it does get darker, and you can see I have like a darker section in that underpainting. There's a bit of a gradient there, so it gets more blue rather than turquoise. So now I'm painting this very light blue, and it will turn into a darker blue. So now I'm bringing in a little bit of ultramarine blue to darken that color gradually. And I'm placing that light blue into that section on the left of the wave. Currently it is a very light color, but it will get darker. And I'm painting around the splashes as well, just to emphasize those shapes. So now I brought in a little bit more ultramarine blue and radiant blue, trying to get more of that area covered. And then once again bringing more ultramarine blue and a little bit of Mars Black to create kind of like a grayish blue, not a super saturated blue. As you can see now, this is getting to be a much darker color. I didn't bother cleaning off my brush, so it still had a bunch of that light paint on it. It wasn't super necessary to clean it because that color kind of helps, honestly, because I'm not creating a really dark intense color. And then I just brought in a little bit of phthalo blue as well, and I'm just blending it into the lighter color I placed down earlier and creating a soft gradient within that section of the wave. I kept going back and forth in this area and just kind of reworking it, trying to get it to look right. So you can see it gets lighter and darker and then lighter again, and I just kept bringing in colors until it looked right to me. And now I'm going back to the lighter turquoise color I created, the color of the transparent wave with the light peeking through it. Just getting some more of that area covered and trying to give me more to work with so I continue detailing the wave. Just trying to get as much color blocking done and cover that underpainting. And as you can see, I'm still moving from the top of the painting to the bottom, making my way down. That's actually not how I normally work. I usually kind of paint all over the place, but for this specific painting I just wanted to go from the top to the bottom. And again, a lot of my paintings are all painted a little bit differently. I don't follow a rigid structure. They're very intuitive. In whatever order I feel like placing down the paint, that's what I do. So next I'm taking titanium white, Mars black, and some phthalo green, along with a little bit of that turquoise color I made. And this color is for some of the foamy bits in the wave that are kind of lifted inside that main beautiful center wave there, and they appear to be this kind of like greenish, grayish, bluish color. So because the light is illuminating the wave from behind it and the foamy bits are a little bit more opaque, they appear slightly silhouetted and darker than the foamy bits that are exposed to the sunlight. So these are in the shade and the shadows. However, there is some of that light source behind them from the sun and the backlit water. So that's what I'm now painting. I'm trying to create some of those crazy random shapes in that wave and just dispersing it throughout it. And to do that, I'm using my detail brush, the liner brush, and this also helps create some of the shadows that are on the foamy bits that are in the sunlight. So it's kind of like the shadows underneath them, I guess. It's so hard to explain, but you can see what I'm doing there. So you've got like all the lightest colors up at the top of the wave, the lightest points where I used a lot of titanium white, and then I'm placing some of those grayish blues and greens underneath it just to kind of emphasize that shape a little bit. And this is what's also going to help me create this effect of the wave sort of curling downwards. So now I've mixed some of the grayish blues and greens with titanium white, and once again this is another shadow color for those lightest bits of the wave of the foam, and this is just to help create a little bit more texture in those areas. And I do this for quite some time, actually. Even later on in the painting I go back and forth between a lot of titanium white and some more of those bluish green colors, and just trying to get things to look right to me. And yeah, it's just a gradual building process. If it doesn't look right to you straight away, just keep working on it and you'll get there. Also, there's a lot of dog hair in my life, so there's some of me picking that off of my brush and my painting. Yeah, that's real life. And as you can see, I'm continuing to take that very light grayish bluish color and just dabbing it onto those areas, trying to blend things out a little bit more and create some of these wave shapes and foamy shadows. Because I ran out of gal kit, I'm now placing down a fresh batch of that onto my palette so I can keep using it. And in that darker blue section of the wave, there are little bits of splashing from the top of the wave and little bits of water and foam dripping down, so I'm just trying to create that effect there in that area. And now, once again, going back to something I sort of left for a little bit, and it's those silhouetted little foamy bits that are being lifted as the wave lifts. So now I'm taking some phthalo green into that turquoise color I created, and a little bit of Mars black, and some of that darker wave color, which basically had phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, and Mars black in it, and once again some more Mars black and phthalo green, and then a tiny little bit of burnt umber. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but I did add a tiny bit of burnt umber onto my palette. So this part, there is a gradient from that blue and that light turquoise as this part of the wave is closer to the sand, and the color that's created as it lifts and that shadow part underneath it is this beautiful darkish green color. I also brought in a little bit of burnt sienna into that color as well, because it does fade into a more yellowy color as we go down to the bottom of the wave, to the part where there's sand peeking through the foam and the water. So now it's starting to get into some slightly earthier colors as we are approaching painting the sand. But for now, I'm just creating this soft gradient from the blues there and also the turquoise in that wave. This is going to create the effect of the wave lifting and further emphasize the light peeking through that wave. I also added a little bit of yellow ochre to my palette because I will be needing it to create a more earthy green as we get closer to the sandy parts. So at this point I'm bringing some radiant turquoise into that darker turquoise color, and I wanted to create a darker version of the lightest turquoise part of that wave for that light peeking through it. As I was painting, I just kind of realized it didn't look quite right to me, and I just decided to darken it up a bit and just rework some of those areas, rework that gradient. And this is totally fine. I do this a lot in most of my paintings. Like, as I'm laying down color, the initial first color I lay down might not be 100% perfect, and I just kind of alter it as I get further into the piece and change things as I go along. Oil paint is super forgiving, and you can really afford to make lots of mistakes with this medium, which is something I really love about it, because none of my paintings are perfect. They never will be, and none of my first attempts at creating anything is perfect. It always takes me a while to work through the paintings and get them to look like what I'm happy with, or happy-ish with. So yeah, that's just something that I tend to do. So now I'm taking some titanium white with a little bit of Galkid, and I'm using my liner brush because I'm going to be painting on some tiny little details. And now I'm using just that bright white paint to paint some of the brightest parts of the waves that are most highlighted by the sunshine. So there is a lot of texture and shape here going on. This moment that was captured of this wave splash mid-second, and I'm just trying to create those highlight colors, the brightest parts where the most sunshine is reflected off of those shapes. Highlight colors aren't ever just purely titanium white, although they certainly can be. I guess it depends on, you know, how bright your lighting is and how far you've edited your reference, or how far I've edited my reference. So in this case, there is a tiny little bit of blue there, and I guess a tiny little bit of yellow as well, but for the most part it's just like a ton of titanium white. And these parts are actually my favorite to paint and work on. I love doing tiny little details, and this really just gives it like a spark of life to me. So now I'm adding some more foamy bits in that wave that are exposed to more sunlight from above, and I was also picking up my filbert brush and going back to some of the darker greens and the shadowy parts and just reworking areas, smoothing things out where they needed to be smoothed out, and then switching back to my liner brush and going back to the details. I'm also painting on some of the details that are behind the wave, some of the water sparkles reflecting off of the ripples of the wave in the darker parts up at the top. And you can see there's some foamy bits that were left behind from previous splashes probably, and I'm painting on those as well. They're kind of dispersed throughout those ripples in the back waves. And yeah, this is where I have the most fun when I'm painting. This is what I'm waiting for eagerly when I'm working on the first color blocking parts and the larger areas. I just can't wait to get to those detail parts and lay those down on top of my colors. So just know that I was having a blast here, but also kind of struggling because no painting is just super duper easy. It might look that way at a fast-paced time lapse, but if you watch the real time, you will see the hesitation in my brush strokes. You will hear me contemplate things and realize mistakes I make and then go over them and just really hear my entire reasoning process. This is just the sped up version where it looks like I know exactly what I'm doing, but in reality, I'm taking my time. I'm analyzing things, figuring it out, mixing the colors, trying to get things to look right. So even if it looks effortless to some people, just know that it's not. So now I'm going back to that beautiful turquoise color, and I'm just building on that soft gradient inside the wave and just trying to further create that soft glow of that light in the lifted wave. Also, I kept describing the light as being like behind the wave, but in reality the sun was like above it, at least from the reference what it looks like this time of day was. It's like above it and a little bit to the back, but not like directly behind it, because then you would have totally different colors and a different appearance. I just wanted to clarify that. And here I'm using some of that darkish turquoise color to create some of the foam bits to make it look like it's broken up and there's several pieces. It didn't really look right to me. Even now as I watch the footage back, it looks kind of wonky, but that's okay. I just, I'll fix it later, not a big deal. But these are some random shapes and they are kind of challenging to create accurately. So these are really more just of like an impression of the reference, not so much created exactly as it appears. There is some inventing I did, not really trying to replicate the entire image, exactly as is. There's always room for inventing and improvising. Now I'm taking some yellow ochre and bringing it into that grayish, greenish, bluish color, and this is going to further continue this gradient at the bottom of the wave because we are getting to the sandier parts. We're gonna have an earthier green, so I'm adding a little bit of burnt sienna there and a little bit of titanium white and more burnt sienna, just a little bit here and there, trying to get the color right. And I'm continuing on that gradient and blending that color in with that darker turquoise color I placed down earlier. Now going back to my highlight color with my liner brush, I'm adding some more of those foamy parts. And now going into some of that grayish, bluish, greenish color I created for some of the shadowy parts of the foam and the bubbles, I'm going to be placing that color into some of the lines I already have in my underpainting. So this is for the shadowy parts of where the wave has been splashed, or waves, multiple waves have been splashing in this area. This is in the sandy part where the waves crash, and there's tons of bubbles and foamy looking stuff right in that area. So lots of craziness, lots of weird shapes. This was actually something that was kind of challenging for me to get right. And now I'm making that color slightly lighter by just bringing in a little bit more titanium white and just making some slightly lighter shadows in there as well. I needed something of those shadow colors that I can then lay down my highlight colors on top of, so that it won't just be a brown underpainting underneath. So now going back to my highlight color with a little bit of Gal Kid gel and just a bunch of titanium white paint. And now I am placing down those brightest parts of the foamy, bubbly parts of the splash. And this part, I don't know how exactly to explain these shapes. You just have to trust your eyes and what you see. I actually had to redo this area several times. I guess not redo, but I went back and built on it some more and altered things here and there. And if you see my hands waving around, that's because I was narrating what I'm doing in the Patreon video. But yeah, this was not the easiest part of the painting. I think this was actually the hardest part of the painting for me, because there's just so much chaos and it's hard to get it right. So, if things get frustrating in your paintings, just sometimes it's good to walk away from a piece. And I actually did. I did not sit here for 7 hours nonstop. This was actually within like 3 or 4 days I painted this on and off. So I would walk away, I'd eat something, I would try to mentally recuperate from some of the frustration and then come back to it. And that's something I do with like every painting. I never just sit down and finish a painting in one sitting. So here it looks like craziness right now in that splashy area. So now I'm going back to that color I used for the wave where it kind of curved. I'm using some burnt umber, yellow ochre, and there's already some of those greens. I'm bringing in some more phthalo green right now. And now we're going to work on the bottommost part, and we'll have the entire underpainting covered. And this part is for the sandy bits at the bottom there. There's actually still water in this area, but it's not freshly like splashed wave craziness, so there's still some bubbly foam bits that will be dispersed around this area, but I'm just placing that color there so that we have more to work with. There's actually quite a bit going on in this section. There's quite a few colors. There's the reflection of the sky, so there's going to be some lighter areas with the water ripples making those weird reflections, so those might appear a little bit more beige. There's a much darker, almost black shadow color directly underneath all the light bubble parts, and some areas have a bit more brown or green, so you really have to pay close attention and examine your reference up close. And now I'm bringing in some Mars Black and Burnt Sienna into that color, and this is for that darker shadow color that's directly underneath all the bubble foam bits. And it did not look exactly how I wanted it to right away. Most of my paintings never do, which is why I build on them over a period of time and try to be patient with myself, and nothing's gonna look perfect right off the bat. That's the beauty of oil painting for me, is that you can always build on it in the future. So it's not like your one decision is that's it, it's set in stone. Like, you can fix it later, you can build on it, you can make it better. I'm just laying down a foundation for myself in this painting. Well, this video is already crazy long, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap things up here. I will show you some of the time-lapse footage of me going back in I think it was the next day, if not in a couple days, just reworking some details and perfecting things. Although I guess perfection isn't really the goal for me. That's something I try to battle within myself, because I'm always spending so much time on my paintings, and sometimes I tend to not move on to the next piece because I'm stuck trying to meticulously detail the crap out of one painting. But this was actually really fun, and I love these little sparkle parts and just making something come alive with my tiny little liner brush and just working in every tiny little detail. Like, I love doing that. However, sometimes it can be really tiring and I need to take breaks and walk away from a painting, and if I don't, then I'll burn out and go into some fun little thing called artist block, and no one likes that, do they? I hope this demonstration wasn't too scary or intimidating for you, and you kind of just see the process broken down a little bit. Not all of my paintings take this long, because sometimes I don't make paintings that are this detailed but sometimes I make paintings that are even more detailed. This is also a really small painting. It's only 6 by 6 inches, and a lot of my larger water paintings take me, you know, could be up to 100 hours or more. I've spent months or even longer working on some of my water paintings, but don't feel like you have to spend that much time. Oil painting can be whatever you want it to be. You can make more of an impressionistic piece. You don't have to slave over details if you don't enjoy it. It does require a lot of patience, and it might not be for everybody. Just understand that you can create art however you want. Your process can be whatever you want it to be. You don't have to paint a certain way just because someone told you to. Art is all about expressing yourself and being free and doing whatever the heck you want, so have fun with it. This is just, once again, one way to approach it. It's one painting, and I paint in different ways for each painting. This is just one example, so I just wanted to clarify that. And my goal for posting this video is to show you a step-by-step breakdown of how I created my water painting, because I get a lot of questions about how I paint water. So this is just one example. Every time I paint water is different. My palette is different. There is no specific formula. It's going to be different every time, because depending on what time of day it is, what the weather is like, what the water is like, is it super wavy, is it more calm, sometimes there's a person in my water paintings, so it all depends on so many factors. So that's what I mean when I say this is just one painting and one example. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully it was helpful to you. Let me know if you have questions or any other video suggestions, and I'd love to do more demonstrations for you. These take a little while for me to make, so thank you so much for your patience, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye everyone!